Chapter 21. Liam found a parking space near the far end of the wharf, where the boat he had chartered to take them to the island town was tied up. Its young captain stood on the bow, smoking a cigarette. "I hope Eric is as willing to follow you onto a boat as he was to follow you into a car," he said, opening Rain's door and helping her out. Leaning into the back seat, he picked up the end of the dog's makeshift leash. "He's shaking all over. He's nervous," Rain said sympathetically. Patting the side of her leg, she called, "Come here, Eric, let's." The big dog erupted from the back seat in a panicked leap that nearly knocked her over. Laughing, she staggered backward, recovered her balance, and reached for his leash in Liam's hand. "Let me hold on to it until we get him on the boat," Liam said. Wrapping the end of the necktie leash around his hand for better control, he tightened his grip. But he needn't have worried, because once the dog's feet were firmly on the ground, Eric sidled up next to Rain and trotted happily beside her. "Have you always been able to tame wild beasts, or is Eric the first?" Liam asked, half seriously. "Eric isn't completely wild," Rain said, scratching Eric behind his ears. "He may have been running loose his whole life, but he likes humans, which means that he was around someone who played with him and handled him when he was a little puppy. If that weren't true, if he hadn't been socialized back then, he wouldn't want anything to do with us now." They reached Liam's chartered boat, and Rain's attention turned to the task of getting Eric aboard. "Let me get on first," she said. Taking the captain's outstretched hand, she stepped off the dock into the boat's stern. Then she turned and patted the side of her leg as she had before. "Come on, Eric," she called. Eric backed up, body trembling with fright. But just as Rain decided they would have to lift him aboard, he gave a giant leap forward and landed against her legs, knocking her into the captain, who grabbed her around the waist to steady her. Rain felt a blush creeping up her cheeks as the captain's hands lingered a bit below her breast. "Are you okay?" Liam asked, stepping down into the boat. His eyes darkened as he took in the sight of the captain still holding Rain. "Yep, just a little bit shaken by his unexpected leap." She chuckled softly as she tried to move away from the captain's hold, but it seemed the young man wasn't ready to let go yet. Liam's chuckle was low, but his gaze remained fixed on the captain's hands, where they remained firm below her chest. "You can let go of her now," he said with thinly veiled displeasure. The captain quickly released Rain, stepping back in a hurry when he met Liam's dark, displeased eyes. He had only held on a bit longer because he'd never had the privilege of touching a beautiful woman like the red-haired woman, and she felt so good to hold that he'd forgotten his place for a moment. He gave Mr. Thompson an apologetic look and hurried away. Liam walked over to the railing to stand beside her, trapping Eric between them. The captain started the engine, and Liam angled sideways, idly watching her long ponytail shift in the breeze as the pier slid away and the boat picked up speed. He couldn't blame the young captain. Rain Wallace was a beauty any man would want to hold or touch. Her beauty was completely out of this world. "Why are you staring at me?" she asked without even turning to look at him. He was staring at her because she had the greenest eyes, the smoothest skin, and the most beautiful mouth of any woman he'd ever known. Her caring nature towards a stray dog showed she also had a kind heart. He admired everything about her, but her kindness made him feel a bit uneasy for some reason. "I was thinking you have a beautiful smile," he replied. Then he turned towards the railing, leaned on it, and watched the boat's wake spread into a wide V. The unexpected compliment filled Rain with pleasure, but since he hadn't sounded entirely pleased, or convincing, when he answered her question, she decided not to reply and pretend he hadn't just complimented her. 20 minutes later, as they neared the town, the captain, still trying to atone for his earlier mistake of holding on to the lady longer than intended, finally broke the silence. "Are either of you fans of Vincent Robert, the movie star?" he asked. When Liam said nothing, Rain looked over her shoulder at the captain, her green eyes shining with excitement at the mention of the movie star who happened to be her and Mia's favorite in university. "I'm a huge fan of his. Well, I heard he is in town. And that's his yacht over there. Do you want me to take you over there? I can get you really close, and you could get a look at him if he's on deck." "No," Liam said coldly at the same time Rain said politely, "No, thank you." Taken aback by his cold reply, Rain looked curiously at him. "You aren't a Vincent Robert fan?" Hell no, he wasn't. And he could never imagine himself being a fan of that asshole. He could still remember their first mission with Neil in the military. It had involved disguising and crashing into Vincent Roberts' party to catch a criminal. The movie star had tried to get in their way by ordering his security to throw them out, but Neil had lost his temper and thrown the first punch at the idiot. When a fight broke out between them, Vincent's men had rushed out to help him while ganging up on Neil. Liam couldn't stand back and watch his friend get ganged up on, so he joined the fight. But he'd ended up receiving a nose-crunching punch from Vincent that night, which had required a little surgery to fix after the fight. Since then, he hated the mere mention of Vincent Robert, and he mostly disliked women fawning over the bastard. He glanced at the redhead, who was waiting for him to answer her question, and said, "I can't, in good conscience, describe myself as a Vincent Robert fan," he said finally. "However," he added, "I'd be interested in hearing why you're such a huge fan of a sissy like Vincent." Rain thought he was being condescending, but she refused to back down from her statement. "I like his personality, and I admire him more as a person than a movie star," she explained very firmly. "Didn't you hear the news of his life with his wife? He has everything a woman would want. And I can assure you, on behalf of every woman, that Vincent Robert is a national husband." Every woman was in tears when he proposed to his wife. "Were you in tears?" Liam asked, turning fully toward her. "Of course. You sound like a hopeless romantic," he pointed out, not seeing anything in Vincent Roberts' overly rated personal life show that was shoved in many people's faces like they gave a fuck about some celebrity's affairs. "I probably am," she admitted. "I guess every woman on earth is." "You don't like hopeless romantic women?" she asked. "Let's just say I'm not a romantic." Although he sounded very sure of that, as Rain looked at his handsome face, she considered some of his actions the night before and arrived at her own conclusion. Smiling a little, she turned away from him and gazed at Vincent Roberts' yacht instead. "What was that all about?" he asked with amused curiosity. "I was deciding for myself whether you're a romantic." "What did you decide?" "I think you are. And you think you can tell things about me just by looking into my eyes?" Rain nodded in the affirmative, but her answer was a little shaky. "I really hope so." Liam suppressed a grin at her uneasy tone and toyed with the idea of surprising her tomorrow by taking her somewhere he thought she'd like. At the moment, however, he wasn't inclined to say anything that would lead to a prolonged discussion of her favorite romantic hero, and he didn't want to commit himself to any plans other than going to bed with her tonight. Chapter 22. The vet's office is a few miles from here, Liam said as he helped Rain off the boat at Pineville, a bustling, picturesque little town on the other side of Maranta Island. "I've called my driver. He's just a few blocks away from here." "Oh, that's," Rain began, but her phone rang, and she paused to take it out of her purse and look at the caller's name. Her heart made a little leap when she saw that the COO of their restaurant was calling. Whenever it had something to do with the restaurant, her anxiety always kicked in, and just like always, she felt it now. "I need to take this phone call. Give me a minute," she told Liam. "All right, I'll take the dog and your suitcase." "My driver is here already," Liam said, already walking toward the street where a white car was waiting for them. Rain put the phone to her ear and covered her other ear with her hand, but there was so much background noise from street traffic and boat motors that she finally took the phone away from her ear and turned the volume all the way up. "I couldn't hear you before, Harry, but I can hear you now." "Did anything happen at the restaurant that I should know about?" she asked, knowing he was in charge while she was away and would only call her when something important came up. "I'm sorry to bother you at this moment, Rain, but something important has come up that needs your attention at the restaurant." Following slowly behind Liam, Rain listened to Harry go over the day's events at the restaurant. The vegetable supplier had delivered only half their order, and the bartender had refused to serve any more of their limited edition fine wines to an inebriated customer who made a scene and had to be escorted out by their securities. But this morning, his attorney called, threatening to sue the restaurant for causing embarrassment to his client, who happened to be the son of someone important. Rain slid into the back seat of the car, and Eric jumped in behind her, so she scooted to the middle of the seat while she gave instructions to Harry, "If the attorney calls back, do not say anything to him. Just refer him to our attorney." "Which bartender was involved?" she asked, already feeling one of her headaches rising again. When Harry told her the name, she said, "Tell Kim to exercise more patience with the customers. I've heard from the rest that he is a little short-tempered." "Did you talk to our vegetable supplier and find out why we got only half our order?" While the car made its slow way along a street, which was lined with shops and crowded with tourists, Rain listened to the rest of Harry's litany of problems, and she did her best to help solve them. But most of the time, she could only answer his questions with a question of her own as she was still trying to learn how to run a failing business. By the time Harry was finished, Rain felt panicked and helpless. "Call me back this afternoon, as soon as you find out what happened to our vegetable order and why our linen stock is suddenly so low," she reminded him before he hung up. She ended the call and slipped the phone into her purse. Then she glanced at Liam and found him watching her, his dark brows drawn together in puzzlement. "Why are you staring at me like that?" she asked self-consciously. "I'm impressed," he said. "I couldn't help overhearing your conversation with your COO. I was under the impression that you're still working at that radio station you told me about. Just now, it sounded as if you've taken over the Wallace family business." Though he knew about Jason being the CEO before everything went downhill for the Wallaces, he hadn't thought Rain would want to continue running a struggling business when she could sell it and start over without the burden of keeping it afloat, like any woman might do. But it turned out he was wrong about her yet again. She wasn't like her brother or any other spoiled, brought-up elite young woman. Rain drew a shaky breath but managed to keep her voice steady as she said, "I made a promise to my father's grave to keep his legacy by running the restaurant the way he would. By chance, I could make it big again, just like my great-grandfather had done." "What about your job at the radio station?" She smiled. "I quit the job so that I could give the restaurant my best effort. I've lived with my family long enough to know how it's done, but I'm not sure I know how to run the business the way my father did." She broke off and looked down at her lap, finally realizing that Eric's head was resting on her knee, his eyes fixed worriedly on her face as if he could feel her emotions. Liam quietly finished the sentence she'd been unable to complete. "You're afraid you're going to fail." "I'm terrified," Rain admitted. "Then have you considered trying to sell it?" "I don't want to. I don't want to disappoint my father and be like Jason. My father loved and took pride in the family business, and he invested all his life in it. How can I let that go because I'm terrified I might fail?" Surprised by a sudden desire to tell Liam about her fears, she reached out and stroked Eric's head, trying to resist the impulse. She'd learned from experience that men don't care how you feel as long as it doesn't concern them or their desires. Max had never listened to her whenever she spilled her fears and feelings. He would either pretend to be listening while being busy with his phone, or ignore her completely. She'd learned to always keep her feelings to herself rather than share them with him or anybody. And she definitely wasn't going to talk to Liam, who had no reason to listen to her about it either. After several moments, she stole a look at Liam, half expecting him to look preoccupied or bored. Instead, he was watching her intently. "Go on," he urged her to say whatever was on her mind. She hesitated only for a second before she found herself talking. I don't want to sell it, and I'm terrified to run it or hand it to someone else, like my uncles. They would be willing to take over it, but my father would never want that. The thought of the responsibility overwhelms me every time I think about it. Not once have I ever imagined myself being in the family business until my father passed away. I have to run it. I can't back out." Rather than offering her empty words of encouragement about her ability to do that, which was what Rain expected him to do, he put his arm around her shoulders and curved his hand around her arm, sliding it slowly up and down in a gesture of comfort. Rain willingly leaned against him, letting the movement of his hand soothe away her fear about the future, at least for now. "I'm sorry about your father's death," he said after a minute. "Are you still finding it hard to cope with the grief? I saw you had a book about coping with grief yesterday." Rain shot him a surprised look as she hadn't expected him to notice the book. "You don't miss anything, do you? Not when I'm concentrating on something. Or someone," he added, and shifted his gaze meaningfully to her lips. Rain knew he was deliberately flirting with her in an effort to distract her and cheer her up, and she smiled and went along with his plan. "You were concentrating on your shirt yesterday, not on me, because you didn't even recognize me at first. I have a rare gift. I can concentrate on two things at the same time, little red." "So can I, pretty face," she teased, "which is why I'm aware that your driver has stopped and is waiting for us to get out." Chapter 23. Pineville was a small town on the island where the clubhouse was, so the veterinarian's office was in a narrow, purple clapboard house, and the waiting room area was obviously his living room. Liam had found the vet's name in a phone book earlier that morning and phoned for an appointment, but even so, they had to wait nearly an hour. During that time, Rain filled out the vet's information sheet, and Eric sniffed every inch of the cramped room, including an angry cat who hissed at the sight of the large dog, a shy brown poodle, and a terrified yellow bird in a cage, all of whom were already there with their owners when Liam and Rain arrived. When the vet finally came out and asked for Miss Wallace, Rain left her purse on the chair next to Liam so that she'd have both hands free to deal with Eric while the vet looked him over. Liam watched her disappear through a doorway, then he picked up a tourist guidebook written in Spanish because there was nothing else to read in the waiting room. Back then, when he realized Neil was half Puerto Rican and spoke Spanish fluently, Liam had decided to learn the language too. He had never regretted learning multiple languages. Rain's phone rang shortly after he began to read, and he let the call go through to her phone's voicemail system, rather than trying to answer it for her. A few minutes later, it rang again, and her voicemail picked up that call too. A few minutes later, she received another call. Liam frowned at her purse, wondering if the busy boyfriend was trying to reach her. If so, he was either very persistent, Liam decided, or else some sixth sense was warning him that his girlfriend was ignoring his calls because she was straying with another man. Gazing at her purse, Liam envisioned a wealthy, middle-aged businessman who'd probably been physically attractive when Rain first met him years before, but who was now getting fat and out of shape, and becoming desperate to maintain his hold on a much younger woman, one who, he feared, might be tiring of her role as his plaything. Liam had witnessed that scenario often enough in the past to be certain he was right about Rain and her boyfriend, but this time he reminded himself to feel a little gentlemanly compassion for the boyfriend. After all, the poor son of a bitch had spent a small fortune to take her on a vacation at a premier spot on an island, and while he was stuck in Zen, Liam was about to take her to bed. He looked up as Rain emerged with the vet, who was repeatedly patting her arm in a way that struck Liam as rather inappropriate. His brows quickly drew together in displeasure. "Don't worry, I'll take good care of the dog," the vet promised, quickly removing his hand from Rain's arm under the angry glare of a man in the waiting room who seemed to be a protective boyfriend or husband. He cleared his throat. "I'll dip the dog for fleas and give him all his shots. If you want me to board him again tomorrow night, just give me a call. In the meantime," he added as Liam rose to his feet, "I'll get all the papers ready so you can take him back to your country when you plan to leave." Liam stared at Rain in amused disbelief, realizing that she planned to take Eric back with her. Then he picked up her suitcase from beside his chair and handed her purse to her. "Instead of calling an ambulance for Eric last night," he joked as he held the front door open for her, "I should have just made my pilot fly him back to your destination in Zen." Rain accepted the jibe with a quick smile and explained her decision. "I have to take him home with me, or he'll end up being euthanized." "Is that what the vet told you?" Liam asked as he stepped off the cracked sidewalk in front of the vet's house and used his free hand to lightly hold her arm to guide her down. Rain nodded. "He said there's no chance of finding a good home for him here or on the island. Eric is a stray, and because he's large, he's expensive to feed." Liam's driver was waiting for them on the street as they approached, and when they were both inside the car, Rain elaborated while Liam gave his driver their next location. "I called Mia this morning," she clarified. "Mia told me that her boys wanted separate dogs since Neil had only gotten one for both of them. So, I told her about Eric, and she agreed to take him in. I think Eric is going to like the boys and be well taken care of." Liam couldn't agree more with that. Neil was a dog person, and no doubt his children had inherited that from him. Eric would like it there, Liam knew, so he changed the subject. "You had several phone calls while you were with the vet. They're probably from Harry at the restaurant or Mia," Rain said, already reaching for her purse. Forgetting that she'd turned the volume on her phone up to its maximum, Rain tapped the screen to retrieve her voicemail messages while Liam politely took the tourist booklet lying on the side of his seat and glanced through it. The first message wasn't from Harry, it was from Max, and he sounded so concerned that Rain felt a stab of guilt. "Rain, why didn't you return my phone call last night, darling? I called you again at the hotel this morning and left a message, and I still haven't heard from you. I'm getting worried. Are you feeling ill? Are the headaches back?" Max's second message made Rain feel even worse. "My love, I just called Mia and she said she talked to you yesterday and this morning, and you're feeling fine. Evidently, you're so angry with me for not being there that you won't even take my calls anymore. I miss you terribly, Rain, and I'm tired of having to go away with you so that we can spend all our days and nights together. We should be able to do that right here in Zen. We've been together for years, and we know we make each other happy. We both want the same things, a home, children, and each other. What else matters?" Unable to bear another word, Rain ended the voice message without listening to the next message. She stole a sidelong glance at Liam, relieved that he seemed to be engrossed in reading the tourist booklet he was holding, but he was frowning, his jaw looked tense, and his grip on the book was so tight she could see his hands slightly shaking. After a moment of uneasy silence, Rain said brightly, "Everything is perfect." In response, he placed the booklet back onto the seat and raised a challenging brow at her. "Your boyfriend seems to think otherwise." "You heard? I couldn't help hearing it. Is he married?" "No, of course not." "Why would you think such a thing?" she exclaimed, horrified. "For one thing, you said you've been together for years, but from what I heard him say just now, you apparently don't live together." "How old is he?" "He's 34. Why do you?" A realization hit Rain, and she twisted toward him in the seat. "Are you by any chance under the impression I'm some sort of," she hesitated and then settled for the least awful of the descriptions that came to mind, "mistress?" I didn't give it much thought, but that seemed like the most probable explanation based on my experiences with similar scenarios. "Have you encountered many, similar, scenarios?" He leaned back, stretched his legs, and paused before bluntly replying, "Yes. Quite a few." Before Rain could react, he asked another question. "Is he the first boyfriend you've had as an adult?" Rain had never been in any other relationship apart from the one she had with Max. She'd never even had flings, nor thought about it until now. She had no reason to hide it, so she answered honestly. Yes, he was her first, and she'd thought he would be the last because they were meant for each other, but it turned out. "Unbelievable," he muttered a little grimly. "How very innocent of you." Startled by his tone, Rain said, "I was never that innocent in the way I think you mean. In fact, I was a wild child." "Good," he said tightly. Rain turned her head and gazed at the foothills of the mountains on her right while she tried to come up with an explanation for his attitude. Something he'd heard in the last few minutes was bothering him, but she couldn't figure out exactly what it was. Chapter 24. After several minutes, Rain glanced sideways and caught him looking at her, his forehead furrowed into a thoughtful frown. Suppressing a self-conscious impulse to smooth her hair, she broke the silence with the first subject that came to her mind. "The atmosphere and weather here are unlike anywhere else I've lived. Everything on the island is so colorful and dreamy." "Yes, it is," he agreed seriously, though he was almost smiling. Rain felt so relieved that she gave him a small grin. Liam's gaze dropped from her bright green eyes to her soft lips, and the impulse to kiss her was so strong that he had to turn his head and look in a different direction and pretend like she wasn't sitting next to him in the car. His conscience had suddenly developed a voice after decades of silence on the subject of sexual principles, and it was in an uproar over the true picture he'd just formed of Rain Wallace. In the car, on the way to the veterinarian, she told him about her fears and how she didn't want to disappoint her deceased father. As she spoke, it had been obvious even to Liam, who had little personal knowledge of loving family relationships, that Rain had loved her father deeply and she was grieving over his death. She was also, by her own admission, terrified of the responsibility she now had of trying to run his last restaurant in Zen. The absentee boyfriend, whom Liam had originally assumed was a wealthy, aging playboy using Rain for a toy, was actually a year younger than Liam, and he not only cared about Rain, he wanted to marry her and have a family with her. He had taken her to a wonderful hotel on a lush, tropical island, undoubtedly to help her recover. When he needed to return to Zen, he'd left behind in that seductive setting a beautiful, grieving, worried Rain who had probably never cheated on him before, but who was so weakened by loneliness and sorrow that she was so ready to fall into Liam's arms despite the fact that she never liked him nor his company before. Next week, or next month, she'd start regretting going to bed with him, and then she'd have guilt to deal with on top of all her other burdens and responsibilities. She was so tender-hearted that in the midst of her own misery over her father's death, she was determined to take a stray dog home with her to keep him safe. She would end up torturing herself for doing anything as cruel as betraying her boyfriend. Liam's conscience pointed out that if he truly liked Rain as much as he felt he did, he'd spare her the aftermath of sleeping with him by telling his driver to turn around and take them back to Pineville where his chartered boat was waiting. He himself wasn't boyfriend material. Among other things, he had no intentions of having a girlfriend nor staying in Zen longer than a week after he returned. He'd already made new living arrangements in another country where he planned to take over the Thompson Corporation's branch there. After all the rumors and speculation about his stepbrothers and Linda Tudor's deaths, He had decided to leave the country and start anew where he had nothing to remind him of his sister's betrayal of trusting a stepbrother they'd only known for a few years over the one they'd known all their lives. He had already used his connections to escape any unwanted interrogation from the authorities that might taint his name or image, but if he continued to be seen in Zen or Mirage Mesa, someone was going to start digging around, and sooner or later his personal history would become tantalizing gossip among people he wouldn't voluntarily share an evening with, let alone the sordid story of his life. Liam's logic went to battle with his conscience and argued that Rain was old enough to decide for herself what she wanted to do and what was best for her. Moreover, prolonged passionate lovemaking would provide her with an excellent, temporary diversion from her woes. That last part wasn't logic, it was lust, Liam's irate conscience pointed out. His rental driver, who had been assigned to him on the island, chose that moment to look over his shoulder and ask him for instructions. "How much farther ahead is the location, sir?" Lost in his thoughts, Liam hesitated, and then said, flatly, "Follow the GPS." Lust and logic had fewer arguments, but louder voices, than his conscience. Rain expected him to turn to her now and explain where they were going, but he looked out his own window again and continued to keep silent with his brows frowned deeply together. Baffled by his silence, she reached across him for the tourist booklet he'd been looking at earlier. She'd already gotten a similar booklet in the lobby of the Island Club, and this booklet had much of the same information. Maranta was a small island occupying only 48 square miles. It was divided between two governments, the northern section being Spanish, the southern section Italian. A map of the island was attached to the back of the booklet, and Rain unfolded it, hoping to gauge where she was. They'd been traveling on a main highway, and according to the map, there was only one of those, and it made a full circle of the island. Based on the landmarks she'd seen, they were now traveling north along the coastline of the Spanish section, with the island sea on the left and the foothills of the mountains on the right. Their destination was obviously in the Spanish section, so Rain started reading about the Spanish section's exciting nightlife, fabulous shops, open-air markets, and glorious beaches, some of which were nude. Concentrating on all that was easier than wondering what was bothering the man beside her. It also prevented her from thinking about Max's phone messages. She was reading her fourth booklet when the driver rounded a curve, slowed down, and then turned right into a winding, landscaped lane bordered by beautiful stone walls. For several minutes the lane wound upward around a hill covered in dense tropical plants. Then the car rounded a sharp bend and stopped at a stone gatehouse, where some uniformed guards stood next to a pair of tall black iron gates with El Jardín Escondido in bold lettering across them. Liam leaned forward and gave one of the guards his name. The gates swung open, the car drove inside and rounded another bend, and Rain gasped with surprise at her first glimpse of their destination. An elaborate 6-story, Mediterranean-style hotel sat against a hillside overlooking the Maranta Sea, with several sets of stone steps with balconies leading down to a long, secluded crescent of pristine white sand. Waiters carried trays of food and drinks up and down the steps to sunbathers on the beach, who were hidden from view by large beach umbrellas. "What a beautiful setting," Rain exclaimed. A doorman opened her door, and Rain stepped out of the car, looking up at the hotel. The roof was made of aqua tiles, and the building was white stucco with graceful, open balconies dotting its facade and larger, enclosed balconies on each side. Inside, the lobby was cool and elegant, with polished stone floors and French doors opening onto a hillside dining balcony. Rain walked with Liam past the front desk, where a couple was arranging for scuba gear and a sailboat. But when Liam continued past the elevators toward a desk with a sign on it that said guest registration, she glanced uncertainly at him. "I haven't registered yet," he explained. "I thought you were staying here?" He shook his head. "I'm not staying here, but I thought this would be more comfortable for the two of us." Rather than go with him to the registration desk, Rain gestured toward a group of chairs near the elevators with a table between them that held a stack of hotel booklets. "I'll wait over there." As Liam strode toward the registration desk, two very attractive women emerged from one of the doors in the lobby. Both women glanced at him, stopped laughing, and then turned partway around to stare after him. They held their comments until they neared the elevators, where Rain was seated. "Oh my God! That man is the best-looking man I've ever seen in my life," one of them said to the other. "He is what you call a god of beauty," her friend agreed in an odd Spanish-accented voice. Then she turned clear around for another look at him. Rain automatically followed her gaze. Liam was casually standing at the registration desk, signing the usual forms. From behind, his shoulders looked a yard wide, Rain realized, but then another realization hit her that banished all thoughts of his manly physique. The god of beauty hadn't brought a suitcase with him. The only explanation she could think of for this was that Liam had decided to remain naked with her until they checked out tomorrow, and that conclusion made Rain's stomach twist. Last night he'd specifically told her to bring something nice to wear because he wanted to take her out to a casino, but he hadn't brought a single change of clothes, not even a bathing suit, because the beach and swimming pool here were probably nude. According to the booklet she'd read in the car, some beaches in the Spanish section were nude beaches, and this hotel was definitely in the Spanish section. The idea of being on a nude beach, let alone being nude herself, horrified Rain. She sank back into her chair, shivering at the thought. Walking around naked or topless in front of strangers was unthinkable for her. The hotel manager waylaid Liam when he finished registering and was on his way toward her. "I'm glad I could arrange the suite you wanted, Mr. Thompson," the manager said, reaching out to shake Liam's hand. "It took some finesse, but the other party was very pleased with your offer and relieved to give up the suite." Rain watched Liam casually reach into his pocket before he shook the manager's hand, and she wondered idly how much money changed hands during that handshake. Then she wondered what offer had been extended and who the other party was. "The butler is upstairs, ready to assist you," the manager added. "All your needs have been taken care of." Rain hoped that included clothes and a bathing suit for Liam, though she doubted it. She looked down, trying to suppress her urge to run for the exit. Liam's shoes appeared directly in front of her a moment later. "Ready?" he said. Rain's gaze slid upward along his legs, past his narrow waist, over the navy blue shirt covering his muscular chest and broad shoulders, and finally encountered his tanned face and piercing black orbs. "What needs of yours has the butler taken care of?" Rain asked as she rose, a smile in her voice to hide her nervousness. His expression softened at the sight of her smile. "I hope it's food." Chapter 25. The suite Liam had chosen was on the top floor of the hotel, at the end of a hall. One of its double doors was slightly open, and a plaque on the wall beside it said it was the presidential suite. Liam opened the door all the way for her, and Rain walked past him into a large foyer. She turned left and gasped. The outside walls of the big suite were all glass, giving a clear, wide view of Maranta Island to the west and north. The carpet was the same aqua color as the sea, the furniture was mostly white, and big vases of tropical flowers added bright colors to the setting. Near the foyer was a formal dining table with 6 chairs. Directly in the center of the suite, facing the glass walls, was an enormous bed covered in fluffy white sheets and a mountain of pillows. It was situated so that the occupants could lie in bed and view the Maranta. In the ceiling, muted cove lighting mirrored the outline of the bed, bathing it in a pale glow. The lighting was positioned so that the occupants of the bed could see what they were doing to each other. Rain yanked her gaze from the bed and moved a few steps forward. Beyond the bed, on the other side of the room in front of the glass wall, was a grouping of white sofas and chairs covered with plump pillows and arranged in a U so that they all looked out across the Maranta. "This is beautiful," Rain said. "I'm glad you're pleased," Liam replied, walking toward the large, enclosed balcony that opened off the western side of the suite. A man whom Rain assumed was the butler was standing out there at a table beneath an umbrella, pouring wine into glasses. Liam turned to Rain. "Take a few minutes to look around while I see if Mr. Ramirez, the butler, has done anything about food out there." "You sound like you're starving," Rain teased. He turned, and Rain felt the full seductive force of his slow, white smile and direct gaze. "I have a very large appetite, Rain." His meaning was unmistakable, and Rain's entire body tensed, mostly from nervousness and mostly from anticipation. He had been so preoccupied and distant in the car that she'd wondered if he was having second thoughts about going to bed with her. After his last remark, she wondered now if he planned to have lunch with her in it, in order to save time. Belatedly realizing that she was standing there as if she'd taken root in the carpet, Rain wandered slowly along in his wake. A large wet bar with 4 stools was positioned near the open balcony doors. In the wall to the right of the bar was an arched entrance into another room, which turned out to be a bathroom dressing room. In the center of the bathroom, beneath a domed skylight, 4 steps descended into a huge sunken tub lined with mosaic tiles and surrounded by pillars. A shower large enough for 5 or 6 people was enclosed in glass on 3 sides with shower heads at various heights and an array of faucets on the remaining wall. Rain put her purse down on one of the vanities. Then she used the bathroom. She was drying her hands when she looked down at her purse, and Max's voicemail came back to haunt her. She always knew he cared a lot about her, but she never thought he would be so worried and scared for her that he would actually propose marriage over the phone, in a voicemail. It was such a touching and out-of-character thing for him to do. Until now, he had let her avoid the topic of marriage, and Rain always thought that was because he was happy with how things were. A life full of work, a woman he liked, and as many golf games as he could fit in. But maybe that wasn't true at all. Maybe he cared so deeply for her that he'd been willing to postpone a marriage he wanted very badly because he didn't want to pressure her into making a commitment until she was completely ready. What a generous, selfless, tender way for him to behave. Rain shook her head, trying to clear away the guilt she was feeling. Then she picked up her purse and carried it with her into the main room. She put it on the bar stool at the end of the bar, started to walk toward the balcony doors, stopped, and turned back around. Earlier, when she'd checked her voicemail, she'd had 3 unheard messages, but she'd listened to only 2 of them. The third message was probably from Harry at the restaurant. If so, she really ought to listen to it. With her back to the balcony, she reached into her purse, grasped the phone, and then let it go. If the message was from Max, she couldn't bear to hear it. Not now. Not when she'd just checked into a hotel with another man to whom she was drawn so deeply, and on so many confusing levels, that she couldn't begin to understand what was happening. All she knew for certain was that she'd felt something profound and magical last night, and she wanted to experience it again. All of it. The desperate longing that came from being kissed by Liam. The exquisite joy of being crushed in his arms with his body straining against hers, and the unexplainable sense of profound closeness she felt at times just looking at him or listening to him speak. But there was no denying that she would regret this later on, which made everything she was thinking and planning to do seem terribly rash. Totally reckless. A little insane. Tension and indecision tightened the muscles at the back of her neck into a knot. Thinking she might be on the verge of getting another headache despite the pills she was taking, Rain reached up to rub her nape. Then she pulled the elastic band out of her hair and shook it loose. Standing on the balcony, Liam watched Rain's thick hair tumble down over her shoulders in a wavy, dark red waterfall, and he lost track of what the suite's butler was telling him. She was wrestling with some sort of decision, he sensed, and then she gave her head a toss, turned on her heel, and started walking toward him. Lifting his wineglass to his lips to hide his appreciative smile, he watched her walk out onto the balcony, a wholesome, unaffected, young woman who looked completely feminine in a green crop top and jeans. Liam had no right to sleep with her and jeopardize her life any more than it had been. She stepped out onto the balcony and walked up to him, a smiling, sexy, desirable woman with a provocative mouth that was made to be kissed, heavily lashed green eyes that melted him, and a slender body he was dying to caress and join with his own. Liam decided he had every right to take her to bed and make love to her, as long as he was honest with her in advance and made sure she had no false illusions or unrealistic expectations afterwards. As long as she wouldn't expect anything more from him. He'd never marry nor take her as a girlfriend, and he had to make certain she knew this in advance before anything else. He picked up a glass of white wine and handed it to her. Mr. Ramirez was telling me about the former occupants of this suite. His expression told Rain he didn't give a damn about that topic but was making polite small talk while the butler was there. The butler turned and bowed politely to Rain and said, "I will unpack for you before I leave, miss. Do you have anything with you that you would like me to clean?" "No, thank you," Rain replied as she picked up a half sandwich and walked over to the chest-high balcony wall for a better look at the view below. Behind her, Mr. Ramirez said, "I've arranged your clothes, Mr. Thompson, and hung them in your closet." Unaware that Liam had followed her, Rain whirled around and almost smashed her sandwich against his chest. "You have clothes to wear," she exclaimed in delight. Bracing his hands on the wall on either side of her, he trapped her and studied her with amused fascination. "You look ready to cheer with relief." Before Rain could respond, Mr. Ramirez said politely, "When I finish unpacking, may I be of any further service to you?" With his smiling gaze still fixed on Rain, Liam replied, "Please turn down the bed before you leave, and see that we are not disturbed for the whole night." Rain gaped at him in horror. "Could you possibly be more obvious? This is a hotel, Little Red," he pointed out reasonably. I know it is, but in the last 5 days, I've checked into 2 of them with different men. I'm feeling like a whore. He chuckled at her description of herself and ran his knuckles up her arm in a lazy caress. So you thought I didn't bring any clothes with me? You didn't have a suitcase with you in the car, Rain pointed out, trying to sound less affected than she was by the touch of his skin against hers. I dropped it off this morning when I came out here to try to arrange for this suite. His knuckles slid across her shoulder and followed the curve of her jaw, which allowed his fingertips to slip beneath the neckline of her shirt and glide over her bare collarbone. Just out of curiosity, what did you think I was going to do about clothes while we were here? I thought you'd decided you weren't going to need any clothes, Rain said shakily, trying to concentrate on his words and not his fingers. According to the tourist booklet, some beaches on the island are nude, she whispered. Have you forgotten I planned to take you to a casino? No, of course not. I thought maybe you intended to skip that tonight. And do what instead? I don't know. Yes, you do, Little Red. Swallowing a laugh, Rain glanced toward the doorway. Shush. Mr. Ramirez is in there. He'll hear us. Who cares? I do. This might sound naive, but I've never checked into a hotel just to sleep with someone, and I'm a bit self-conscious about it. I suppose you've done it many times before, haven't you? Now you're making me feel self-conscious. I shouldn't have asked that, Rain said regretfully. Probably not, he whispered. Rain stiffened at the implied reprimand, but before she could think of a suitable response, he twined his left hand through her hair and tipped her head back. His warm lips came down on hers in a long, slow, searching kiss filled with lazy hunger. Finally, he lifted his mouth from hers with a wet sound before she could get lost in the kiss. Let's go inside. Rain nodded agreement. By then, she would have nodded agreement if he'd suggested they jump off the balcony headfirst, but once they were in the suite, his tone and his words startled her out of her sensual haze. We need to talk, Rain. Sit down. Surprised by his businesslike tone, Rain perched her hip on the arm of a sofa and watched curiously as he walked over to the glass wall, shoved his hands into his pockets, and looked down for several seconds as if composing his thoughts. When he turned, his expression was friendly but resolute. Before you get into bed with me, I want to make sure you don't have any misunderstandings about us. I'm telling you this because I don't want you looking back at this day with any regret. Go on, Rain said when he paused. You've said you're a romantic, and last night might have seemed more meaningful than it actually was. We have a lot of physical chemistry, but last night, on the beach in the moonlight, those kisses might have felt. What's the word? Magical? Rain suggested, using the word that matched her own feelings about last night. She regretted revealing her feelings, but Liam seemed to agree. Magical works. You weren't the only one affected by the setting and the moment. I was too. Enough that I came back to answer your questions, which I normally wouldn't have done. But that was last night, and last night was an exception. Trying not to jump to conclusions and to stay calm, Rain tilted her head and smiled slightly. Are you trying to warn me off? Not at all. I've wanted to get you into bed since dinner last night. Are you setting some ground rules, then? I don't think so. Then what are you doing? I'm having a crisis of conscience, he said with frustration, and I'm trying to deal with it.